Let's get into it. Welcome to the Azcende Dialogue, the show or the podcast will be dialogue about all things geopolitics, national security, and investment in the Australian context, right? And I guess what we have been doing in the past on the Azcende Dialogue was basically interviewing individuals, in that space. But I guess I think there's enough happening around the world to actually probably do something like this every couple of weeks. Just to bring, I guess, the national security tech community up to speed in terms of what's happening. I mean, over the last week already, so much has been happening in this space. So my co-host, Mr. Alok Patel, and I'll get you to do a little intro, because I was looking at your bio for one of our portfolio companies the other day, and I'm thinking, you wear like 4 or 5 hats. I'm like, it's a good thing that you're single. You got time up your sleeve, right? Otherwise, you'd be absolutely smashed.
Yeah,
well, you are smashed.
Thank you. I still don't think Mum's happy about my status, but that's okay. That's certainly.
Hey, I've been married 3 times, so it could be,
we even out, right?
Yeah. But tell us, you're NSAA. You're serving in the Australian Defence Force Reserves. Lots happening.
Absolutely, and there's never been a greater time to be in national security, which isn't necessarily a good thing, but certainly it's always an honour to serve the great nation that is Australia and everything that we've been given. So I'm very, very honoured to be able to do that. The NSAA was really a response to a growing concern that I had, that not enough Australian businesses appreciate the impact of national security and the growing disorder when it comes to the world that is geopolitics. Obviously, a lot of Australians have particular views on the new US president, moving towards the end of his 100 days, but certainly there's concerns about how he's leading his nation. We saw the effect of COVID. We recently saw in southeast Queensland the effect of Cyclone Alfred. The reality is those kinds of disruptions potentially shadow the possible effects of a global conflict if it were to get to a point where we could see a third world war. And so the NSAA was really about creating an awareness so that Australia could establish itself to be far more resilient than I think it currently is, when it understands its supply chains, its trading partners, and the need to establish relationships, but also an opportunity, which frankly is what compels me more than anything, which is an opportunity for Australia to be emboldened by the fact that we have so much to offer the world. And we sometimes don't see that that's appropriate. The tall poppy syndrome does come into effect. But I met many great Australians that are doing a lot to make a difference. And I'm excited, Lani, that we get to really talk to those people over the coming podcasts, with people that are challenging the status quo, are challenging cultural norms, because sometimes norms are meant to be broken. And I think there's never been a greater time for the Australian way to project out to the rest of the world, to maybe bring a sense of, security and consistency that the world's never needed before.
Love it. Okay. And then on top of founding that and getting that up going late last year, you're also not stepping aside from the Azcende stuff, but you're also sort of now pivoting to launching one of our portfolio companies, Asymmetric, right? Which means that you've spent a lot of time in the US and will spend a lot of time this year. But I guess from a perspective, you have a much deeper perspective of the US defense industrial base, than most people, right? And it's that uncommon view, in terms of you're a serving officer in the defense forces, you're a investor, you're running a startup in that defense space. It gives you a pretty uncommon view of things.
Yeah, I mean, I literally sometimes need to wear a different hat deliberately just to remind myself what hat I'm wearing on a given day. But
what email address to use, right?
Yes, I have a few. It's almost like I thought
Mm,
it's really cool having multiple email addresses. Now I realize, yeah, not as cool as I thought it was.
mm,
You
mm,
know, I mean, defense was all about understanding, like from a personal standpoint, I don't like professing to have expertise or knowledge of something when
mm,
I
mm,
haven't been a part of the system. And, my previous service as a reservist in the Australian Army was very short and sweet and a great sort of really entree to what I've been honored to be able to do in uniform now, although in a different service, which is a service I didn't plan to go into, but it's great to be in the Navy. And,
mm.
I serve as a Navy officer currently posted to headquarters, 1st Australian Division, which is an Army unit, even though I'm Navy. And I certainly get asked often why I'm there, which is always a fun conversation to have, whether it's the why am I Navy and doing an Army job. But ADF is, such a tight knit community, and I'm like really grateful to work amongst people that are doing, their country proud
Mm.
every single day. And my work is very much consistent with my background in artificial intelligence and cyber and autonomous systems. And I work basically, in that sector
Mm.
supporting headquarters first division. It's great to understand the challenges and the opportunities that we have, and certainly, many of the ADF are doing, their very best to make sure that we're equipped
Mm.
for
Yeah.
any future fight or future threat that obviously we hope never happens.
Mm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and it's all around that deterrence, right? So
Yeah.
we're actually going to get to that defense industrial base a little bit later on, given the theme of this particular podcast is innovation in the defense industrial base. So look, let's go. We're going to cover off things, a few sort of like a bit of a national security news roundup. Spend 10 or so minutes going over it, and then we'll
Right.
dovetail into the topic at hand. So, I guess from a national security perspective, we have two ongoing wars happening. Ukraine still chugging along. Israel has just ceased the ceasefire that was in place with Hamas, and we're not going too deeply into that, but what, in your view, what are the impacts for from an Australian context? Obviously, from what I've seen, the Ukraine war, the government, I think, has indicated that we would, if it came to it, we would provide peacekeepers. So obviously, that's an effect, and
Mm.
really the war in the Middle East is probably nothing at the moment, unless it expands to include Iran, right? Which
Yeah.
then puts pressure on supply chain, etc., from an energy oil perspective. What are your thoughts?
So I think, the conflicts are not creating direct impact to Australia, but obviously increase our concern around the spiraling nature of relationships
Mm,
that they're causing our allies. So obviously, with recent interactions between the United States and Europe and NATO and the effect, there's clearly a sense of, are these relationships as strong as we've been able to rely upon in
mm,
the past?
mm,
And the answer, so I would argue, and this may not necessarily be widely shared, I think they remain strong. I think the very nature and the expectation of those relationships is what's changing.
yeah, yeah.
And so that is something that is making people uncomfortable because people like things to stay the same. The
Hmm.
reality is things have needed to change.
Mm,
It's just that people have hopefully wanted to avoid those changes.
yeah, yeah.
Ukraine has seen the greatest adoption rate for emerging technology, obviously, in
Mm,
particular, drones, in order to fight their wars. It's obvious that is really the only choice that they have.
mm,
The Israel Defense Forces have long since been one of the most innovative, defense organizations on the planet,
mm,
considering their ability to adopt cyber and other technologies in order to
mhm,
maintain both situational awareness as well as being able to respond to offensive strikes against the Israeli people and the IDF itself.
mhm,
It's not that this has been unprecedented. It's that
mm,
we all now realize, hey, actually, we can't make the assumption that large established state actors and their formed body militaries
Hmm.
will respond with the same type of capability we're used to defending against.
Yeah, yeah. And I think
And,
that, the what you mentioned earlier on in terms of the geopolitics of it now merging into national security. I'm always of the opinion that geopolitics is upstream of national security, and then which is upstream of defense, right?
mm,
And we saw it. I mean, we've seen it. We saw what happened with when Zelensky visited the White House. This is about a month and a half ago, and that sort of extraordinary um, fight, cat fight, that occurred in the White House, right in front of the whole press. But I
yeah,
don't know. There's a story which we were going to cover anyway. It's probably a good time to dovetail into it around what they're calling Signalgate in the US, where a group of principals in national security, all the national security team, formed a signal group to talk about the upcoming strikes against the Houthis in Yemen. And inadvertently, someone, I think it was National Security Advisor Mike Waltz, added a journalist, not just any normal journalist, but probably one of the most anti-Trump journalists in the US, Jeffrey Goldberg. But there's the national security and OPSEC implications that come from it. But I think what I was, sort of raised my eyebrows was just how, from a geopolitical perspective, some of the principles on that um, signal group were just so anti-Europe. Right, Europe are freeloaders. They're not pulling their weight, which is and that's primarily JD Vance, right? So once you get from that geopolitical aspect, it does have ramifications from a national security and defense perspective.
mm,
But I think what I'm hearing you say is that it's really just the changing nature. It's become more transactional. The alliances will still remain, right? NATO, etc., will still remain, but it's just
mm,
the expectations, defense spend. The Trump admin wants it pushed up to 5% GDP for those countries. So what I'm
yep,
hearing you saying, it's just the expectations, and it's just going to become a little bit more transactional
yep.
in that regards.
It's look. I think there's always been a frustration in my mind as to the contribution of European nations to NATO versus the United States.
Mm, mm,
And I don't whilst I would argue previous administrations, including the previous Trump administration, that would made a clear signal to NATO, pull
mm,
your weight.
mm,
The reality is America's always been seen as the world's big brother, and
yep.
that if something bad happens, America will come and support you.
Mm,
The reality is that America, being true to its word of being a free and open market and society, has fallen foul to those that would manipulate the things that have made America maintain its strength and its point of attraction
mhm,
against itself fundamentally.
mm, yeah.
So, knowing, Americans like I do, the thing I'm always grateful for is, who they are as a people and what they
Mm,
want for the world. The administration is, a current point in time that are doing what they can to arrest a sense of control, and certainly it will look severe from my perspective in that their actions. And I can't speak for the way things are being done because,
mm,
for starters, I'm not a politician, nor am I a senior US government official, nor will I ever become a senior US government official in the context of I'm an Australian. The reality is that we've got to look at this in the contrast of what has been happening over the last, 2 decades,
mm,
in
yeah.
particular the last decade, that really the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative has been playing a whole new game that
Hmm.
something like USAID absolutely cannot compete against.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's where, again, not to speak, ill of the fact that everyone's job should be about finding a way to make the whole of humanity better. The
Hmm.
reality is that we haven't been innovative, and this is what I think is the greatest opportunity to take it back to referencing your comments about innovation. I think innovation is not activity. Innovation is outcomes,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and that's, I like to often say, don't confuse activity with progress.
Hmm.
And unfortunately, a lot of innovation has been activity and not progress.
Mm, mm,
So China with Belt and Road delivered progress. Now, at what cost? That is the issue.
yeah.
And
Yeah.
there is no doubt that the cost has been often too high when you look
Mm.
at their actions in Sri Lanka, taking the port of Sri Lanka, their actions in Africa, where they seize and hold
Mm.
dams and other critical infrastructure that they build.
Mm-hmm.
There's clearly a lot. The cost is too high for the
Mm.
notional innovation, where the US government in previous administrations has maintained a status quo because that's, in their mind, soft power has
Mm-hmm.
been more than enough because America is America. America's,
Mm-hmm.
one of the greatest
Mm.
countries in the world.
Mm.
But the effect of that soft power influence has not translated like it did in the late 50s,
Yeah,
60s, 70s,
definitely.
80s, right?
Mm.
So
It's definitely waning, and I think I mean I get the administration's frustration with the fact that after World War II, the Marshall Plan, the US became more of that globalist, looking to rebuild Europe, rebuild Japan, etc.
mm,
But I think over the last 2 decades, it's almost like the other nations are taking the piss in terms of what they can extract from that, as opposed from what they can put back, right? And the Trump administration hasn't been, and Trump himself hasn't been overly shy in demanding that Europeans in particular increase their defense spend, so they're not so reliant on the US, right? And I guess that is a good dovetail into one of the topics in our current affairs, which is the upcoming Australian election. But as a prelude to that, on Tuesday night, the federal budget was released, right? And we've got a research note that'll go out after this on that. The high, the big ticket items, I guess, on that is defense spend as a percentage of GDP is going to increase by, I think it was 2.3%, right?
mm.
Which is more than, it's an increase. But I guess the summary of the research note that we're writing is essentially that it's an incremental step change, but insufficient to deal with current geopolitical challenges. What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, more spending on defense is good. How it's spent and again is more money activity, is more money progress.
Yeah, great point. Yeah.
And I think based on observations,
Mm.
the real question is what will the government do? As you know, Lani, Australia is about to walk into a federal election,
Mm.
and certainly, so whilst the budget's great, what will be something that we'll have to monitor is, will the government hold ground and will they stay in power? Will we see a new government? Will that government have majority? These questions will be very determinant as
Mm.
to what we will see. What matters is we see progress.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
and certainly from my perspective, progress would be and should be measured by actual capability and actual spending to industry that also reflects establishment of a sovereign industrial base.
Mm.
And I
Hmm.
think, we need to start making hard decisions. I personally feel more people will be offended or should be offended than pleased, because ultimately winners have to be picked and winners must deliver. And if they're not delivering, then they should absolutely be replaced. And
Mm.
that's
Mm.
not necessarily about, I think the government should pick, person X, person Y, or company X,
Hmm.
company Y. It's more about saying we should be clear about the expectation of progress. And
Mm.
I
Yeah.
think the issue is that there's few in government that have the experience where the time compression effect, which we are currently undergoing, has been something that they're used to being able to operate in. And
Mm.
that's one of the key challenges that both government and industry have, is that we're not used to a tempo where
Hmm.
we're talking about, quarters, not half years, and certainly
Hmm.
not like half decades.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, look, as soon as you talk about defense budget and progress, and in particular outcomes, the big ticket item on that is obviously AUKUS, right? It's been fairly polarizing. I mean, I see a lot, a bit of a split in the national security community, to those wanting to scrap it and go back to getting the French subs, to those who say, look, we're all in, right, and we have to commit to it. What are your thoughts on AUKUS? I know you've spent a bit of time in terms of researching it and whatnot. Of course, your time in the Navy, you've been across it. What are your thoughts? Should we continue to pursue it? Is it too risky in terms of we could end up in 15, 20 years time with no subs? What are your thoughts?
Look, I'm all about leaning in. I mean,
Mm,
I'm always proud to have many American veterans and active duty members as brothers and sisters in arms. So, from
hmm.
my perspective, I think the US is the right partner
Yeah.
in technological capability. I
Mhm.
think we need to be more aggressive, is my view. And yes, I think we should have Virginia class subs. Yes, I think we should be further.
As
uh,
the Virginia class subs is a stopgap measure, right? As we're building our own sort of quasi-sovereign capability.
Yeah, so I'm actually a believer that I don't think we should build the AUKUS class submarine. I think we should
Okay.
just buy Virginias.
Hmm.
I think what we should be doing is building a third and maybe even fourth Virginia class shipyard in
Mm.
Australia.
Yeah.
So I think building essentially Australian capability
Hmm.
that lands in that where we help support the establishment of US capability in Australia
Yeah.
is the move that we should be taking,
Okay.
that moves us to a position where we are not like we're not beholden to congressional
Yeah.
interdiction. Might mean America needs to seize the sub for
Hmm.
themselves because it's critical to their like
Mm.
national
Mm.
security, which I
Yeah. Yeah.
certainly understand why that is in play.
Mm.
But and despite the fact the US Navy reduced their request for a sub from two, I think it was like it's two down to one in
Yeah.
order for
Yeah.
that excess to be basically allocated to Australia.
Mm.
The issue
Mm.
is they still have a whole bunch of manufacturing productivity issues that whilst they're trying to we've seen the introduction by the Trump administration to the Office of Shipbuilding, which is
Hmm.
great. Again, the question is, like all government organizations, irrespective of who is running it, you know, activity is not progress.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah.
until we
Hmm.
see, the Virginia class going from 1.2, 1.5 to 2.5,
Hmm.
right, which is, 100% increase in productivity,
Mm. Mm.
the reality is, how will we know that this is really going to be a difference? My view is the best way to augment that, build at least a third shipbuilding facility here in
Yeah.
Australia.
Yeah.
Australian government funds it, with
Hmm.
America, with American capital, with American know-how. That is a really
Private
great.
capital, or are you talking primarily government funded?
So I think private capital first,
Mm.
and then followed by public capital, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
I mean, private capital leveraging, government demand for,
Mm.
capability is the best return of investment. It's a great economic,
Hmm.
model.
Hmm.
Obviously, I haven't done the numbers, but my view is that presents a great opportunity for Australians and for
Hmm.
Americans. It's
Mm.
representative of the AUKUS alliance, and it fundamentally puts security where it needs to be, which is in the
Mm.
region.
Yeah, yeah. The challenge I always find is big, massive projects like that. Probably lean more towards government funding long term. We're talking decades, etc. But as we've seen, and governments essentially inherently don't deliver those kind of projects within budget, and in terms of finally the objectives, it is usually not met, right? So that is the challenge. How do you fuse the two together? Is it public-private partnerships? Is it the government underwriting and saying, hey, look, if Raytheon or whoever it is, if you can build these things, we'll put the first order in for X amount, etc. I think it still remains to be seen what the best model is, because if you look at from an industrial base perspective, it's very different from the Chinese model, right?
Yeah.
In terms of how they fund all their projects, and their shipbuilding, I think at the moment is outclassing everyone in the world combined in terms of what they can churn out.
Look, absolutely. Whilst I'm not saying I've seen this model, but in the back of my head, all I can think
Mm,
of is maybe infrastructure development should be a lot more like venture capital, where you
mm,
have, the more innovative players put in smaller amounts of cash,
yep,
and then you
yep,
slowly layer upon, cash and debt as the project reaches different stages of maturity.
mm, hmm,
Like, could we achieve infrastructure development and large-scale manufacturing through a novel approach to deploying the infrastructure
Yeah.
in order to achieve the results that we need to, noting that that should really be the higher order target, not the fact that we've broken ground, like, hey, milestone ticked. It's got to be about what the ultimate goal that we're serving.
Yeah.
And perhaps there's a new way of looking at the underlying problem.
Yeah, look, absolutely, and we talk about in the whole startup ecosystem about agility and being able to pivot, speed, acceleration, all that good stuff. I just don't know, and this probably dovetails into our main topic. I just don't know how well that plays into long-term, decades-long projects. Right? I'll give an example, which is the last on our current affairs, is the new F-47 that's just been announced. So Boeing won the contract for what they called NGAD, the Next Generation Air Dominance Fighter, right? So this is due to replace the F-22 Raptor. Now the Raptor was, when the requirements were done for the Raptor, they were still in the middle of the Cold War. So the Raptor's actually designed short distances over European airspace. It was meant to combat Soviet aircraft at the time. But by the time the Raptor rolled off, in the early 2000s, the Soviet Union was no more, right? It's broken apart. So the requirements, it became wholly unsuited towards the global war on terror. And so what ended up happening is, instead of like 300 or 400 aircraft, they only built 187 because the requirements had changed and the aircraft no longer sort of suited. But the challenge being is that things have, again, right, the geopolitically has changed. Now the F-47 Next Generation Air Dominance Fighter is going to be larger, longer sort of range, because it's designed now to fight over the Pacific. So how do you, and this probably is a good dovetail into our topic, how do you design requirements and, programs that are so long, right? 15 years before the first prototype flies. How can you do that from an innovation perspective?
Yeah, so I think this is where it's never been more important to recognize what the mission is. And innovation is not about building a product and an outcome, like as in this like ultimate fighter, ultimate jet. Just side note, I'm not loving what the F-47 looks like. It looks like the worst aircraft ever.
It's definitely not the F-14. My favorite aircraft. Not Top Gun.
It's definitely not Top Gun. The F-14 remains my favorite looking fighter of all times. There's no doubt about that, for a bunch of different reasons, other than like fictional aircraft, which I've got a whole different, desired, science fiction fighter. Certainly, I think we've got to look at what we're trying to achieve, and often, and the work that I'm doing in asymmetric, the question we ask is, don't replace the thing, replace what the thing is trying to achieve.
The capability, right?
Yeah. Well, actually, to go further, the effect, right? So if we think of the specific outcomes that we want to achieve in a battle space, in an economic environment, like whatever it might be, what we should be looking at, and Clayton Christensen, my professor at Harvard Business School, the way he talked about disruptive innovation is, don't sell the thing, sell what the thing's doing, right? So don't sell a power drill, sell the 3-inch hole the power drill is being used for. That's what the customer wants. But there are, Bunnings here in Australia, Home Depot for our American counterparts, they're going to buy a power drill because they want a hole. The issue is, like, there are a number of ways to make that hole. They just think the power drill is the answer. Now, it could also be a person with a power drill rather than, buying their own power drill. And I think this is the question we have to ask is, well, are there multiple ways of solving the problem? And can we do that without necessarily a big thing? Now, I'm not saying we shouldn't have an F-47, because like an MRUN, Abrams tank, there are other value drivers for something
Mm.
like that, right? I mean, I'm not going to be scared of a drone as I would be of a tank facing me off.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Not that I ever think I'll be in that position personally, but certainly, there are benefits of superiority like that. And we want humans in the loop and humans being able to observe and interdict key, threats and needs to perform strikes. I think that will always be the case. The issue is, though, if we try and make it a one size fits all, which unfortunately I think often happens, because that's how defense primes have positioned themselves. That's where we get into trouble.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, you mentioned asymmetric, right? It's one of our companies, and it is looking to, I guess, increase the rate of innovation or the outcomes of innovation in the defense industrial base.
Yep.
Tell us a bit about that. How is it looking to do that or help to solve those challenges?
Yeah. So, we at Ascend obviously have evaluated over 500 companies in varieties of
Mm.
forms. And the technology companies have had what we've seen consistency is, great founders that are trying to do really important work.
Mm-hmm.
The issue is that as VCs, we need to balance great technology with great business.
Mm.
This is our first fund, and our reputation as investors to our limited partners is really important. And so that's fundamentally why we always made sure that we knew the business could succeed with minimal intervention by us
Yep.
as
Yep.
investors.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, what we saw, as you know, we saw more great tech than we saw great businesses.
Yeah.
And
Correct.
and when you look at defense as an industry vertical, unlike energy and water and a lot of other industry verticals, defense is the one, or national security is the one industry vertical with only an economic price that is the ceiling of defense expenditure.
Okay,
So,
can you explain that a little bit further?
yeah, sure. So when defense says it will buy a Harpoon missile
Mm-hmm.
or like an F-47, the price they pay is the ceiling economic value.
Got it.
Why?
Yep.
Because, sure, Lockheed Martin can resell, Boeing can sell the F-47 to other nations, but it's the price that that country's defense price will put on it. That is the top price.
Yep.
There is no economic output value of that F-47.
Mm.
Unlike in the energy sector, government can choose to buy
Yes.
nuclear power plants. You can buy, wind farms, whatever it might be. We know what the price the government's paying, but we can actually see commercially the economic value of the energy that it's basically outputting.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
And that is across all other industry verticals, whether you just own like an industrial park and you've got some solar panels, or obviously you're a government and you built a nuclear power plant. That economic output value allows us to see the underlying economics as a throughput rather than just a top ceiling cost
Price.
or price.
Yep.
That is the challenge for all defense tech, in that ultimately it's what their nation or a representative's nation is willing to pay for that technology. That is their ceiling. So sure, we can see $100 million contracts come out the door, which is fantastic for tech companies when they do receive those kind of contracts. But typically they're correlated with very high operational costs, very expensive and hard to access skilled workforces. These are things that are still confronting a lot of tech companies inside this industry vertical. In recognizing those problems, asymmetric was established because we felt one of the major challenges we had was semantics and taxonomy, in that we are not consistently assessing technology on a matter that allows us to compare apples with apples, oranges with oranges, or if we speak the parlance, UAVs with UAVs, UUVs with UUVs, or optic sensors, electronics, semiconductors, all of the critical elements that make up the innovation that defense tech is based upon.
Yep.
We are not consistently making assessments of that. And what we realized in this path of discovery is that whilst that's really important. Although, depending on who you talk to in
Mm-hmm.
government and even out of government, there's a question as to what the value of that is.
Mm.
What we've recognized is the problem that we just discussed, which is actually what defense really needs and what warfighters have been screaming for is an ability to understand, hey, what effect do I want to deliver in a battle space?
Mm.
And let me work backwards from the effect I want to deliver, because that's
Got it.
really what
Mm.
what we want, right? Like we want to know, hey, I want to put rounds down range, I want to put,
Mm-hmm.
I want to neutralize, I want to deter, I want to like deny. Like these are task verbs that have long since been established in military doctrine.
Mm. Mm.
These are publicly available doctrine, not something that people typically read because it's not exactly, it's good bedtime reading, I should say,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
especially for the uninitiated. Fundamentally, these are things that we use in planning. These are things we use in order to understand what is it that we want to achieve.
Mm.
So, in recognizing that, and when you correlate innovation against those task verbs or effects,
Mm-hmm.
that is what helps us get a more effective alignment between what is being built by awesome founders that are very mission driven to try and make a
Mm.
difference in the defense community with what the defense community is trying to understand, which is how can we use this? Not
Yeah. There's a bit
not
of a disconnect, isn't there? What we
exactly.
found. Yeah.
Exactly. And look, not everyone is
Mm.
is innovative and willing to see the greater picture. I mean,
Mm.
I met some astounding, retired personnel that frankly I have no doubt who they were, what they were like when they were wearing a uniform. But a great example of some of the most innovative minds that came out of defense are people like John Boyd, who came up with the OODA loop, which is the
Mm-hmm.
observe,
Yep.
orientate,
Yes.
decide, enact
The Air Force. Yep.
in the Air Force. Now, he
Mm.
wasn't necessarily a well-liked colonel in
Mm.
the Air
Yeah.
Force because he challenged a lot of doctrine, despite the fact that he was probably one of the US Air Force's brightest minds
Mm-hmm.
when it comes to the way he built a framework. And when you apply his thinking in the
Mm.
context of what technology needs to do, it is
Mm-hmm.
absolutely on point. When you
Mm-hmm.
overlay that with people like Clayton Christensen and his disruptive innovation theories, it's
Mm.
those two minds that what I think will build game-changing technologies
Mm.
as a data service provider that is building an AI decision support tool. What Asymmetric will provide the community is not just an ability to accelerate defense's ability to buy wins
Mm-hmm.
and a tech company's ability to accelerate their time to
Mm.
win with defense organizations, the industrial base, as well as agencies
Mm-hmm.
themselves, is the fact that we will have a data set that allows us to more effectively translate technology and its dual use potential, whether
Yeah.
it is currently seeking defense as its primary customer base or whether it's toying with the idea of the national security context being
Mm.
an opportunity to expand its relevance and thereby its resilience in what could be economic headwinds for the world.
Mm. Okay. Okay. And in terms of how you do that, it's obviously it sounds like it's going to be a SaaS data platform, etc., that looks to not just measure the efficacy of defense tech, but the rate of change in terms of how that tech is developed, right? Working in the startup ecosystem.
Absolutely.
Mm.
So, yes. So, because we need to keep our venture capital masters happy, Lani. No, no. Look, SaaS model made the most sense for a bunch of
Mm.
different reasons. Even though I know it's obviously a very popular and if not one of
Hmm.
the easiest cheats for a company to have an underlying great set of books. A
Mm.
SaaS model made a lot of sense for us because it gave us the ability to meaningfully attract tech companies to come to the platform
Mm. Mm.
as it does the industrial base to utilize and access the data. This is
Hmm.
it's a closed environment, so it's not available to anybody and everybody. It's either tech
Yeah.
companies, organizations, so commercial organizations that have existing relationships with defense agencies because
Mm.
that requires them having appropriate levels of security clearance and compliance with their own data and their own IT systems, which is very important for us. And then obviously we work with defense agencies. primarily at this stage, the US government and US DoD, we haven't started engaging officially with the ADF yet. That is something that is definitely on our list of things for this year. And then we're in early conversations with the UK Ministry of Defence.
Yeah, got it. Okay, very interesting. Good luck to you, and good luck to us.
Thank you.
In terms of the endeavors.
Awesome.
I guess, and slowly sort of bringing this to this first podcast to a close. And this is probably a question, unscripted one for you, from an investment perspective, right? You've raised capital in both, general sort of emerging tech, and now we're looking to raise capital in particularly in the defense national security space. What's the difference in terms of the investors you're talking to, the VCs, etc.? Are they more, I guess? Is there more scrutiny, I guess, than you would, if you were raising for a fintech or whatnot product? What's your experience been?
I think it's been interesting dealing with the different types of investors and navigating the landscape where I think in defense, people have their preferences in terms of what they want to invest in.
Yeah. Bombs, missiles, bullets, drones. Yeah.
And I mean, look, drones are popular for obvious reasons, right? They have obvious dual use potentials when it comes to both in military domains, being, the intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance capabilities versus delivering lethal effects into the battle space. So there's multiple, uses for a singular technology, which is great. And that means more exposure to more opportunities in side DoD. The issue is that, are we actually solving the whole or not? And is this the flavor of the month or not?
Yeah.
It's my view based on a lot of conversations I've had with retired senior officers, so 1 stars and up, that if we were to go to war in the next 5 years, China is obviously saying that in 2 years' time they're looking at making a move on Taiwan. The reality is we will still fight with 80% of what we already know how to, because in order to use exquisite or new modern technology, we have to have the training to do that.
Yeah.
And there is not enough in the field being used to have the training doctrine in order to deploy it on a scaled fashion.
Yep.
Certainly companies like Anduril, Saronic, and Shield AI have recognized that, which is why a lot of their capabilities actually are more a replacement and significant upgrade to existing systems that would otherwise be used. Things that look like Hellfires, but they're actually UAVs launched from the same platform. Great technology, really important technology, augments a whole bunch of issues from supply chain issues, but also giving enhanced performance parameters that we've not necessarily seen before. These are all really, really good things. The issue is that, again, we don't know what we're likely to come up against, which is why I'm grateful that Defense Innovation Unit, the National Security Innovation Network in the United States are doing all that they can to elicit tech companies to come to them and for them to do what they can to support how tech companies are given the right exposure to defense, so that we've got as many answers to as many problems. Whether we know about every problem or not, that is part of the challenge that people are starting to be able to kind of go, hey, but do we know these problems? Do we have there's no master list of catalog of problems, but certainly, General Rainey, who's, US Army Futures Command, he very much recognizes the need for, we need to solve our capabilities and our ability to respond to threats more effectively than ever before. So they're very conscious of it. They are doing things to make a difference. Time will tell. I'm just keen to make sure that we know that we're seeing progress, because progress is what, as one of our advisors would say, Lieutenant General Larry Nicholson would say, we need to deter our enemy at least one day at a time.
Yeah.
And they want to be able to say, not today. And so that's where progress is telling our enemy, not today. And that's what we need to keep maintaining that pace. Just spending money is not necessarily a direct line to say yeah, not today. It's just
Mhm.
spending more money because, China, Iran, Russia, all of these nations that are part of, the new forming like axis of whatever they are. The
Mhm.
reality is that they know we have to spend money. That's not
Mm.
a surprise to them. They've
Mhm.
already got that intelligence. It's about what is that converting to is what we need to be worried about. Like, and
Mm.
that's what they need to be worried about. We need to demonstrate
Mhm.
that clearly enough for them to
Mm.
go, yeah, they're adapting
Mm.
way, way too fast for us.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, very interesting. Look, it did, as we talked about right at the beginning, there's so much happening in the space. It's a great place to be, right? So, thank you. We'll bring that to the end of our first podcast on in this sort of configuration. But do follow us if you're watching on our socials, on X, on LinkedIn, on YouTube, etc. Give us a ping us in terms of what you want us to talk about. We've got a bit of a topic each time. We'll record every 2 to 3 weeks. And also, too, we're on the hunt for a co-host. So if you want to put yourself forward or suggest someone, please let us know. But thank you. Till next time. This is Lani Rafidi and my good friend Alok Patel and business partner signing out.
G'day, guys. See you guys.
Bye-bye.